What's going on, y'all? Today we got Larry Bird and Bill Laimbeer have genuinely hated each other for over 30 years. Let's get into it, man. Let's get into it.
If you know one thing about Larry Bird's relationship with Bill Laimbeer, it's probably this incident from 1987, when Laimbeer put a hard foul on Bird and
Oh, yeah, I've
Bird
seen
threw
this.
a basketball at Laimbeer. That was a climactic moment, but by no means an isolated incident. It was part of a late 80s war for Eastern Conference dominance, a Boston to Detroit power shift characterized by brilliance and brutality. But these two weren't just participants in a team rivalry. There was beef. Beef before the fight, and more beef to come after it. Beef that persists decades later. Larry Bird and Bill Laimbeer do not like
Wait,
each
so they still don't like each other?
The late 70s was an awesome era of college basketball in the state of Indiana. Bird and Laimbeer entered it from very different directions. Laimbeer was the 7-foot son of a wealthy manufacturing executive, raised in the fancy suburbs of Chicago and LA. He played 4 years at Notre Dame simply because he could. Laimbeer helped the Irish reach their first Final Four in 1978, but he was set for life, with little motivation to become a great pro player. That hardly changed when the Cleveland Cavaliers drafted him with the 65th pick in 1979. Bird was the fourth of 6 siblings who grew up poor in small-town Indiana. Bobby Knight recruited Bird to play at Indiana University, but the overwhelmed and homesick 17-year-old dropped out before his freshman season even began. Bird ended up enrolling at much smaller Indiana State and played so brilliantly there that the Boston Celtics drafted Bird 6th in 1978, even though he planned to stay for his senior year, in which the Sycamores made the 1979
They was running away from my boy
final
Larry.
versus Magic Johnson's Michigan State. Bird and Laimbeer didn't really cross paths in college, but Larry definitely knew about Bill, if only because Laimbeer was one of his mother Georgia's favorite players. Cool. So let's jump ahead to 1985. Bird was at this point already an era-defining superstar, already a 2-time champion with the Celtics, who'd wrested Eastern dominance back from the Sixers, then taken down the mighty Lakers in the '84 final. Bird held reigning regular season and finals MVP over his friend and rival Magic. Larry was on top of the NBA. Laimbeer wasn't doing so badly for himself either. After a year abroad and a couple years with the miserable Cleveland Cavaliers, Bill had been traded to the Detroit Pistons, where he joined young superstar point guard Isaiah Thomas, another product of Indiana college basketball and, for what it's worth, another longtime favorite of Georgia Bird. Laimbeer had made a reputation for himself as a Piston. He was a powerful defender and rebounder, a deft outside shooter, a regular all-star right alongside Bird. Dude was also dirty like a diaper. Laimbeer fouled, flopped, and whined. Bird already knew the dude's deal from moments like this one in 1982. Laimbeer wildly swinging his elbows, then exploding at the ref who called a foul. That was just a taste. Beginning in '85, Bird would get heavy, near-annual doses of the Bill Laimbeer experience. The Pistons and Celtics played 5 playoff series in 7 seasons, with Boston holding the upper hand early on, Detroit taking over at the end of the decade, and both submitting to Michael Jordan's Bulls in the early 90s. But yeah, that initial power struggle got rough. The Celtics crushed Detroit in Game 1 of the '85 Eastern semifinals. In the second half of what would be another Pistons loss in Game 2, a frustrated Laimbeer hit Bird with one elbow on a pump fake, then another one that left Larry bleeding from his chin. Bird immediately came the other way, demanded the ball from Ray Williams, then buried a jumper. And he wasn't done, despite the blood collecting on his jersey. In the fourth quarter, Bird scorched each of Laimbeer's teammates to reach 30 points, then 34, 36, 38. Bird finished with 42 points,
Getting off on them
17 of them in
boys.
the fourth quarter of that second victory. He was coy about the incidents that got him going. Yeah, the Pistons got away with a few elbows, but mostly it was the Celtics getting Larry the ball down low. He did note that Laimbeer wasn't playing well and seemed frustrated. Well, Big Bill turned around and dominated Game 3. He led Detroit with 27 points and got into it with Boston big man Robert Parrish. Bird had more to say this time. He trash-talked Laimbeer on the floor, suggesting Boston was going to sweep Detroit, and after the Pistons actually won Game 3, Bird and the Celtics accused the violent fouler of drawing fouls the other way by flopping like a fish out of water. Bird said refs favored Laimbeer, that he got all the calls. And he specified that the other Pistons were fine. It was Laimbeer and Laimbeer alone with whom the Celtics had a problem. Laimbeer said the accusations and mockery didn't bother him, but he fired back, calling the Celtics cocky. And this on the same day, reporters spied Bird impersonating Laimbeer on the practice floor. Detroit took Game 4 to tie the series, and Laimbeer accosted the guy who'd predicted a Boston sweep and shouted, "Where's your broom now, guy?" From there, things cooled down a bit. Boston won the series in 6 games and went on to rematch the Lakers in the final. Laimbeer was chastened and never messed with Larry and the Celtics again. Just kidding. Detroit got Laimbeer a new fouling companion, Rick Mahorn, in the summer of '85. Here are those two giving Larry a nice thump in November of that year. When Larry found out Bill had been left off the '86 Eastern All-Star team after making it 3 straight years, he said, "Good, now I won't have to worry about him saying, 'Hi, Larry,' and me having to say, 'F you, Bill.'" Bird definitely wasn't shy about his feelings toward Laimbeer. When SI's Jack McCallum asked the Celtics about their foe in '86, Bill Walton wouldn't let his response be printed. Parrish said, "If you can't say something nice about someone, then don't say anything." Bird delivered the blunt answer everyone else was withholding. "We don't like him that good." Well, Bird and friends were lucky to avoid his company that postseason. Detroit lost in the first round, so Boston didn't have to battle Laimbeer and the Pistons to win their way to the '86 championship. No such luck the next season. The Celtics and Pistons met in the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals, and it was not a cordial meeting. Not with the man Michael Jordan had just dubbed the NBA's dirtiest player involved. Just like in '85, the Celtics took care of the first 2 games at home. So just like in '85, Laimbeer made his presence felt in Game 3. The climax of a tense and violent Pistons victory arrived when Bird pump-faked Laimbeer into the air, and Laimbeer came down with a sledgehammer. Bird was not pleased and had to be pried off Laimbeer in a dog pile. So Larry found himself a long-range weapon and pegged Laimbeer with the basketball. Laimbeer got ejected for starting the fight. Bird got ejected for the ball throwing. The Pistons went on to win that game, and now the real game was afoot, the beef game. Bird was still fuming in the locker room. He reminded everyone of what MJ said, then went in on Laimbeer. He wished the refs would have just cleared the court and let them fight because Bill didn't want any part of Larry. Bird acknowledged that he was at fault for throwing the ball, but he wasn't intimidated and had to protect himself from someone like Laimbeer. The opposing recollection was vintage Laimbeer. "I didn't do a thing. I was trying to break his fall, and Larry just came up swinging. I was victimized by my reputation." Bird wouldn't hear it. "Sure, he wasn't trying to hurt me, and I was trying to throw the ball to the referee. Bill's face just got in the way." The beef ran more icy than hot in Game 4. Bird refused to shake Laimbeer's hand before the game, and even though a lineup shift put Bird on Laimbeer as a defender, the two of them didn't really get into it. Laimbeer just quietly dominated the smaller Bird, and Detroit tied the series with a blowout victory at home. But afterward, Bird made clear he wasn't over the Game 3 incident. Laimbeer suggested he'd made snidey comments after the denied handshake in Game 4. And asked about said snidey comment, Bird repeated it as "go blank blank," which I guess doesn't stand for "go enjoy yourself," since Larry also said, "I don't like Bill Laimbeer, why should I shake his hand?" Laimbeer? Well, you never know until you try. This was very much Bill Laimbeer's MO. Incite conflict on the court.
I don't like guys like that. I don't like that.
Anyway, back to Boston for Game 5. Laimbeer, who had just been fined $5,000 for the fight, sarcastically
basically trolling. He basically just trolling at that point.
Down the hero of Celtics fans. Bird was actually kind of wary. He didn't like Laimbeer, but he also didn't want someone to hurt him or anything like that. Bird was talking about the fans in that quote. He neglected to share that sentiment with his teammates. In Game 5, Bird made his point with another refused handshake. Bird's pal Robert Parrish emphasized that point with his hands. These claws to the face didn't even get a foul call, let alone a technical or ejection. Anyway, in this pivotal Game 5, the basketball eclipsed the beef. With just seconds left and the Pistons up 1, Bird got his shot blocked and the ball caromed out of bounds off the Celtics. As Isaiah Thomas hurried his inbound to Laimbeer, Detroit had the win in hand. But then Bird engineered one of the most legendary plays and one of the best Johnny Most radio calls in Celtics history.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right at 1 second left. What a play by Bird.
That was the decisive play of the series. Parrish got suspended for the attack that Bird deemed a good deed, and Boston lost gear having a big scoring night. The Celtics won that game to tie the series, and Bird mocked Laimbeer a bit for passing up the final shot. But as Larry remained ice cold, the Pistons pulled away in games 5 and 6 to seize the Eastern crown. In a move the Pistons would one day famously imitate, the bitter Celtics starters walked off the floor before the final buzzer commenced the Silver Dome celebration. That was the beginning of the
Is that where they got the the idea for the no handshake, Joel? Is that where they got the idea for that when they did it to Mike and them?
end of an excellent Celtics era. Bird was too hurt to face the Pistons in the first round the following season. Detroit swept Boston that series and eventually swept the Lakers to win Laimbeer and company their first title in '89. Detroit repeated the following season while Boston once again bounced in the first round. The Celtics and Pistons met again in the '91 Eastern semifinals, but Bird was once again slowed by back injuries, and this was really just a battle to see who would become the Bulls' conference final victim. It was finally Jordan's time to wear the crown. MJ, by the way, was pretty clear in 1990 how he felt about Bird and Laimbeer's chippy play on the floor.
If you had 273 professional basketball players and you say who's the 30th player in the NBA, you know, I say 95%, I say Laimbeer or Larry Bird.
Granted, I think neither guy would deny this characterization. Laimbeer, for one, released a video game called Combat Basketball in 1991. He owned his reputation. Anyway, both guys' careers wound down in the early 90s, and fans were left to wonder whether their mutual distaste would cool in retirement. Well, when the Celtics retired Bird's jersey in 1993, Bob Costas joked that it was a perfect night even though Laimbeer couldn't attend. And Bird said, "We'd probably hang him up there with my jersey." When Laimbeer contemplated his own retirement later that year, he said, "I don't want to go out like Larry Bird," aka worn down and injured in his final game. But what about later? In the decades since retiring, both Bird and Laimbeer have stayed close to basketball, coaching, managing, and making media appearances. And when you make media appearances, this stuff comes up now and then. In 2008, Laimbeer was head coach of the WNBA's Detroit Shock. Bird was an executive for the Indiana Pacers, who were in the middle of a playoff drought. When the Shock visited Indianapolis to play the Fever, Laimbeer went on local radio. He got asked about Bird, and he answered. I can't find the audio, but the wonderful Indy Cornrows blog transcribed it at the time. Laimbeer said he didn't really pay attention to how the Pacers were doing, but also betrayed that he kinda did. When Bob Kravitz confirmed the Pacers hadn't been making the postseason, the guy who had coached the Shock to multiple rings was like, "That would drive me nuts. I'd probably quit." After piling on a bit more about Bird's inability to lead Indiana to a title, Laimbeer was asked about staying in touch with Larry and said he just didn't care to. They didn't grow up together, they were never friends, so why hang out? Finally, Laimbeer was asked what he would do if Bird called him and offered him a job with the Pacers, and he guessed that entire premise was faulty. And while Bird did go on record in 2009 to say Laimbeer was a hell of a coach, I think Laimbeer guessed correctly. In 2013, Bird was interviewed by a fan and didn't sound like he'd forgiven Laimbeer for the way he played.
You never really ever liked Laimbeer in any social situation?
No.
Yeah.
And it's because he was a dirty player.
And Laimbeer isn't interested in what I guess is the post-playing version of trying to shake Bird's hand.
Larry Bird's sitting next to you right now. Would you talk to him? Would you have a conversation with him? What would you say?
I'd probably go to a different table.
So yeah, it's not like they're still drawing blood and throwing basketballs, but beef between Bill Laimbeer and Larry Bird may never die. Laimbeer was a very good player who thrived on starting shit. He said it best, "I don't fight, I agitate, then walk away." Well, it turns out one of the greatest players of all time wasn't just going to let him walk away. Not this guy, not that night in '87, not before, and not since. Years of playoff conflict that culminated in a power shift all but guaranteed personal feuds. Of all those subplots, this is the one that never went away. Sometimes, when you agitate people, they stay agitated forever.
And that's the end of this one, y'all. Calm little production, man. If y'all enjoyed this, let me know what other Larry Bird reactions y'all want me to react to, man. Larry Bird and Bill Laimbeer, man, they still don't like each other. I understand, though. You know, competition. It's what you've been working for your whole life, you know, so shit. You got bad blood with 1-2 people. You know, it is what it is, man. I understand. If you enjoyed this reaction, click on the last reaction on your screen right now. Turn on post notifications. Links in the description, man. And I'm out of here.